Women over 60, #1 lying expert. If he does this, you know he's lying instantly. Deception experts who've spent decades analyzing interrogations, studying micro-expressions, and teaching law enforcement how to detect lies have identified specific behaviors that reveal dishonesty with remarkable accuracy. And there's one behavior in particular, something so consistent across liars that experts call it the single most reliable indicator, that most women completely miss because they're looking for the wrong things. We've been taught to watch for shifty eyes, nervous fidgeting, elaborate stories. But the truth is more subtle and far more revealing. The behavior that instantly signals deception has nothing to do with what most of us have learned to look for, and everything to do with a specific pattern that happens in real time during conversation. A pattern you can learn to recognize immediately once you know what you're watching for. At 60 and beyond, we've lived long enough to know that our instincts are usually right. That feeling in your gut when something doesn't add up, when a story feels off, when you can't quite put your finger on what's wrong but you know something is, that instinct is real, and it's trying to tell you something. The problem is we've been trained to ignore it, to give people the benefit of the doubt, to tell ourselves we're being paranoid or untrusting. Mark Twain said, "If you tell the truth, you don't have to remember anything." Deception experts have built entire careers proving this insight correct. Liars reveal themselves not through what they remember, but through what they have to construct. And that construction process shows up in specific, observable behaviors. If you're ready to understand what actually reveals deception, not myths about eye contact or nervous gestures, but the real behavioral signal that experts rely on, you're in the right place. This channel is about giving you practical tools for navigating relationships with clarity and confidence. Consider subscribing if you want information you can actually use, not vague advice about trusting your heart. We're building a community of women who see clearly and make decisions based on reality. The #1 sign he's lying: the pause and construct pattern. The single most reliable indicator that someone is lying, according to deception experts, is what they call the pause and construct pattern. It happens in real time during conversation, and once you know what to look for, it's unmistakable. Here's how it works. When you ask a direct question, a truthful person answers from memory almost immediately. Their response flows naturally because they're retrieving information that actually happened. A liar, however, has to construct their answer, and that construction process creates a specific, observable pause followed by carefully assembled details. Helen noticed this pattern with Robert when she asked him a simple question about where he'd been Tuesday afternoon. There was a pause. Not long, maybe 2 or 3 seconds, but it was there. His eyes shifted slightly upward and to the left, the direction people look when they're constructing rather than remembering. Then he answered with a level of detail that felt oddly specific. "I was at the hardware store on Maple Street, the one near the coffee shop we went to that one time, looking at paint samples for the garage project I mentioned last week." The over-specification was itself a red flag. People telling the truth answer questions directly. "I was at the hardware store." They don't typically offer unnecessary details unless asked because they're simply reporting what happened. Liars add details to make their constructed story sound more believable, not realizing that the excess detail itself signals fabrication. What deception experts have found through thousands of analyzed interviews is that this pause-construct pattern is remarkably consistent across all types of lies, from small deceptions to major betrayals. The pause happens because the person has to think about what answer will be believable, what details to include, whether their story aligns with what you might already know. Truth tellers don't need that processing time. They just tell you what happened. Why this pattern is more reliable than other tells. Most people think liars avoid eye contact, but deception experts have debunked this myth repeatedly. Skilled liars often maintain steady eye contact precisely because they know people associate avoidance with dishonesty. Similarly, nervous fidgeting, touching the face, shifting posture, all the behaviors we've been taught to look for can happen for numerous reasons that have nothing to do with lying. Someone might be anxious, uncomfortable, tired, or simply have nervous habits. The pause construct pattern, however, is specifically tied to the cognitive load of fabrication. When you're remembering something that actually happened, your brain retrieves the memory quickly. When you're inventing something, your brain has to do significantly more work. Create a plausible scenario, check it against what the other person might know, add enough detail to sound convincing, monitor your delivery to seem natural. That cognitive work takes time, and it shows up as a pause before the constructed answer. Margaret learned to recognize this pattern after her sister, a retired detective, explained it to her. Margaret had been dating Thomas for 6 months, and occasionally she'd get a feeling that something was off about his stories. Nothing she could point to specifically, just a sense that things didn't quite add up. Her sister taught her to pay attention to the timing of his responses to direct questions. The next time Margaret felt that uncomfortable instinct, she asked Thomas directly where he'd been Saturday when he'd said he was meeting his brother. The pause was there, brief but unmistakable, followed by an overly detailed answer about which restaurant they'd gone to, what they'd ordered, a conversation they'd had about Thomas's nephew. Later, when she happened to mention the lunch to Thomas's brother, he looked confused. They hadn't met Saturday. Thomas had lied, and the pause construct pattern had been the tell Margaret's instincts had picked up on before her conscious mind understood what she was noticing. How liars try to hide the pause. Once you know about the pause construct pattern, you might assume liars would try to eliminate it. Some do, but the attempt itself creates other observable behaviors. The most common strategy is what experts call filling the pause, responding to questions with immediate but non-committal phrases that buy them time to construct their actual answer. Linda noticed this with Kenneth. When she'd ask him direct questions about his day, he'd immediately respond with phrases like, "Why do you ask?" or "That's a random question," or "Let me think." These weren't answers, they were pause fillers that gave him time to construct what he'd say next. The pattern was immediate deflection, brief pause while he thought, then the constructed answer. Deception experts call these bridging statements, verbal tactics that create space between the question and the answer without making the pause as obvious. Other common bridges include turning the question back on you, like, "Why? What did you do today?" Or asking for clarification they don't actually need, like, "What do you mean, where was I?" Or making jokes to deflect, like, "Wow, are you checking up on me?" Once Linda understood this pattern, she started noticing it constantly. Kenneth almost never answered direct questions directly. There was always some form of deflection or delay, followed by answers that felt constructed rather than simply reported. The cumulative effect was that she couldn't trust anything he said because nothing felt like it was coming from straightforward truth. Have you noticed pause construct patterns in your relationships? Share your observations in the comments. The difference between normal pauses and deceptive ones. Not every pause signals deception. Sometimes people pause because they're trying to remember specific details from something that actually happened, especially if the question is about something weeks or months in the past. The key is recognizing the difference between a searching memory pause and a constructing answer pause. Memory searching pauses typically involve visual cues that suggest retrieval, eyes moving as if scanning for information, expressions that suggest genuine effort to remember, phrases like, "Let me think," "Yes, I remember now," followed by answers that emerge gradually as memory clarifies.
The person seems to be pulling up actual information, and the details they provide feel organic rather than carefully assembled. Construction pauses feel different. The person's face often goes slightly blank during the pause. Experts call this thinking face, as if they've momentarily disconnected from the conversation to work something out internally. Then the answer comes out fully formed, often with a level of certainty and detail that doesn't match the initial pause. It's as if they've written a paragraph in their head and are now reading it to you. Susan learned to distinguish these pauses with her partner, Richard. When she asked him about events from weeks ago, he'd pause to remember, his face showing genuine recall effort, and his answers would emerge in pieces. I think that was, yes, Tuesday, because I remember the grocery store was crowded. The memory built as he spoke, which is how real recollection works. But when she asked about more recent events, especially ones that triggered her instinct that something was off, the pause was different. His face would go momentarily blank, then he'd deliver a complete, detailed answer that felt pre-assembled. The difference was subtle but unmistakable once she knew what to look for. And sure enough, the answers that followed construction pauses were the ones that later turned out to be lies. What to do when you catch the pause-construct pattern? Recognizing deception is one thing. Knowing what to do with that recognition is another. When you notice the pause-construct pattern, you have several options, depending on what the lie is about and what the relationship means to you. For small, inconsequential lies, sometimes people lie about minor things out of habit or discomfort with vulnerability. If you notice the pattern around trivial matters, whether he actually enjoyed a movie, what he ate for lunch, how his day went, it might signal discomfort with intimacy rather than major deception. You can choose to address it gently. I notice you pause before answering certain questions, like you're thinking about what to say rather than just saying it. Is there a reason you feel like you can't just tell me directly? For lies about things that matter, if the pause-construct pattern appears around questions about his whereabouts, other relationships, money, commitments, anything that directly affects you and the relationship, that's a different level of concern. Patricia caught this pattern when asking David about charges on their shared credit card. The pause, the constructed answer, the unnecessary details, it all added up to deception about something that affected her directly. She didn't confront him immediately. First, she quietly verified what she could. She checked the details of his story against observable facts, and when she'd confirmed the lie, she addressed it directly. When I asked you about those charges, there was a pause before you answered, and the explanation you gave doesn't match the actual timeline. I need you to tell me the truth. The directness made it clear she wasn't going to accept further fabrication. For patterns of deception, if you're noticing the pause-construct pattern frequently around multiple topics, you're not dealing with isolated lies, you're dealing with a person who is fundamentally dishonest with you. At that point, the question isn't about any single lie, it's about whether you want to be in a relationship with someone you can't trust. Helen reached this conclusion with Robert after months of noticing the pattern. Small lies, medium lies, eventually lies about things that significantly affected her. The cumulative effect was that she couldn't believe anything he said, couldn't relax into the relationship, spent her energy trying to verify or catch him instead of actually enjoying their time together. She finally recognized that a relationship without trust wasn't a relationship at all. It was just two people occupying the same space while one of them was constantly deceiving the other. Trust your instincts. They're reading what you can't yet articulate. Here's what experts want women to understand. Your instinct that something's off is usually based on micro cues you're picking up unconsciously. You notice the pause even if you're not consciously timing it. You register the shift from natural flow to constructed delivery even if you can't articulate what changed. Your gut knows something's wrong before your conscious mind can name it. The problem is, we've been socialized to distrust our instincts, especially when they're telling us something uncomfortable about someone we care about. We tell ourselves we're being paranoid, untrusting, looking for problems. We give benefit of the doubt when the pause-construct pattern is literally showing us deception in real time.
Dorothy spent years ignoring her instincts with Alan. She'd feel that uncomfortable sensation when he answered certain questions, but she'd push it down, tell herself she was being suspicious without reason, remind herself that healthy relationships require trust. What she didn't understand was that trust should be based on trustworthy behavior, not on forcing yourself to ignore evidence that someone isn't trustworthy. When she finally learned about the pause construct pattern and started consciously watching for it, she realized her instincts had been right all along. The uncomfortable feeling she'd been dismissing was her unconscious mind recognizing deception cues before her conscious awareness could name them. Once she gave herself permission to trust what she was sensing, the pattern became obvious. Alan paused and constructed answers to a disturbing percentage of her direct questions. He'd been lying to her consistently, and her body had known it long before her mind accepted it.
The number one sign someone is lying, the pattern deception experts rely on more than any other, is the pause-construct response to direct questions. That brief moment where they have to think about their answer, rather than simply reporting what happened, followed by a carefully assembled response that often includes unnecessary detail. It's remarkably consistent across all types of deception, and once you know what to look for, it's unmistakable. At this stage of life, you've earned the right to trust your instincts. That uncomfortable feeling when something doesn't add up isn't paranoia. It's your unconscious mind reading cues your conscious awareness hasn't yet articulated. The pause construct pattern is often what you're sensing, without being able to name it. Now you can name it. Now you can watch for it consciously. And now you can make decisions based on what you're actually observing instead of what you hope is true. You deserve relationships built on honesty, where you don't have to be a detective, where direct questions get direct answers, where the person you're with values truth more than convenience. When you're consistently seeing the pause construct pattern, you're not dealing with someone who occasionally struggles with difficult truths. You're dealing with someone who's fundamentally dishonest with you. That information matters, and what you do with it will determine whether you spend your time in real partnership or in a performance of relationship with someone who can't be trusted. If this conversation gave you clarity, I'd be grateful if you'd subscribe and join our community of women who see reality clearly and make decisions from strength. We're having honest conversations here about what actually protects you, not comfortable myths about love conquering all. Until next time, trust your instincts, watch for the patterns, and remember that you deserve honesty as the baseline, not as something you have to beg for.